Thank you for joining me in the garden today. I'm Liz Davey, and you're watching A Walk in the Garden, which is being filmed at my garden by Norfolk Community Cable Television, NCTV. It is now mid-August, and we have been experiencing enough rain. 2 years ago, in looking at my notes, we were fighting a drought. Everything, the grass was brown, the plants were all dying back prematurely, and this year it's nothing like that. Welcome to New England. You don't know what you're going to get, which makes gardening a lot of fun. Generally things are on schedule as you go through the years, but they do vary a little bit from week to week and month to month, especially based on the weather. Today I'm in the herb garden where we usually start, and everything is still looking pretty green and lush. Things are starting to go to seed a little bit. We have some little flowers coming up on the anise hyssop, and some of the mint is starting to go to seed as well. But today I want to continue harvesting because it is mid-August and eventually fall will come and these things will die back. So I'd like to have some to keep. And today I'm going to pick some sage. And again, I'll just make some little bundles. Sage is pretty much evergreen, and I can come running out here and pick sage unless it's covered with snow pretty much all year, except, as I said, when it's covered with snow. But again, I'll just bundle some of the sage in little bundles with a rubber band, and then we'll take them in and hang them in my dining room, which is a cool and not too bright spot since we tend not to use it too often. And I could also use a spare bedroom or any place that isn't in direct sun to dry these herbs. The other thing I want to dry is some mint, and I have a number of different kinds of mint. This one is a mint julep mint, and I'm going to pick a large stem of that one. And then I also have apple mint and some of the other mints. And again, I'll put a rubber band around it and take it in to dry. The mints then can be used dried to make a mint tea, and I'm thinking that might be really nice in the winter to have a nice cup of mint tea, especially if you get a cold in the winter and need something just kind of warm and refreshing. So we'll dry some mint leaves for making some tea later. Mint can also be used in a variety of other dishes. Other things that I can harvest and dry would include lemon verbena, which is a very tender annual and will go pretty fast once a frost hits it. So we've got another month or so to harvest that as it grows. But it's another nice one that makes a lovely cup of tea, or you can add it to rice or some other dishes for a nice little lemon flavor. It's one of my favorite herbs. Again, I have other types of mint. The chives are starting, because we've had rain, to put on some more green foliage, and I have some old chive blossom stems in here, and at this point you don't have to cut them back, you can just pull them out. It improves the look of the plant. They've gone to seed already, and I assume that some of these that are now nice and bright green have come up from the seeds since we have had the rain. The rain has kept our plants nice and green, but the rain has also produced a bumper crop of weeds. So we have to keep moving around the garden and pulling some of those weeds so that they don't detract from the plants. Remember that each weed that goes to seed, if you can't pull them, at least cut off the seeding part, because if they do go to seed, you'll get thousands and thousands of baby weeds to take their place next year. And you really don't want to increase your work. So the more you weed, each year the weeds become less. And that's something to think about as you look at the weeds and realize it's a hot day and you really don't want to do it. But it will save you work in the long run if you do get out there and get those weeds pulled. Mulch can only do so much. You really need to get the roots out in order to get the weeds out of the garden. We have, as I said, a variety of mints. The roses are done for the year, but There's lemon balm, lime balm. The scented geraniums have done quite well because they are getting adequate moisture. Otherwise, I would have to be watering those all the time. And we have a lot of thyme that we can pick and dry as well. Lemon thyme, caraway thyme, which is very nice with pork. And so then English thyme, just regular English thyme as well as a lime thyme, which is something a little different. It has kind of a lime flavor. Now let's move over to the perennial area. We have some work to do over there too. Been moving around in the perennial garden. We still have some plants that will bloom a little later. I also have the potted plants that I've put in, but they do need to be deadheaded after they've bloomed so that maybe we'll get some more bloom. The echinacea, again, needs to be deadheaded, and then hopefully we'll get a little more bloom from it. So as soon as the flowers go by, it's time to snap off the heads. This one is platycodon. It's the bluebells, and again, once it's gone, I definitely want to get this out of the garden. We have some with flowers already, and we may get a few more flowers from it by taking off these, but it will seed itself around your garden very liberally, and I already have enough, so I really don't want any more of it. Therefore, I will take the seed heads off as they are completely gone. I don't want to sacrifice any blooms if I can help it, because it's a nice, lovely color in the garden this season. But I really don't want it to go to seed in the garden. So these will be trashed or composted. If they're composted, there's a possibility they will go to seed. So probably the trash is the best idea. And again, an echinacea that's gone by. It makes the garden look neater. It also promotes secondary blooms. This is a eupatorium chocolate, and it has yet to bloom. There are some asters in here which will also be blooming. And we also have Boltonia back here, which will have blue aster-like or white aster-like blooms later, as well as a calla lily. And this has a bloom in bud, and it will have a nice red bloom in probably another week or two. This is a butterfly bush, and again, once the flowers have gone on one stem, I will cut them off. This one doesn't seed around too badly here, but it will encourage further bloom if you keep the old blooms cut off. And I really like to keep this blooming. The hummingbirds really love it. The butterflies love it too. The grasses have started to put on their seed heads, showing that we are getting to the end of the season. This is an artemisia, and again, its blooms have gone by. They were yellow, and we'll just cut those off. Another one to take off there. And it just neatens up the garden. If you have leaves that have gone bad on any of the plants, it's time to take those off too, particularly on roses. Any leaves that have gotten diseased should come off. This is the Lychnis or Maltese cross plant, and it is going to seed. And what I will do is bring out a cup, and you can see these little chalices that are filled with its seed. And on a dry, sunny day, we're finally getting one, I'll bring out a paper cup or an envelope and collect the seeds from that so that I can share them with others. This is a native plant that is very good for butterflies. The same is true of the butterfly weed. And you'll notice its seed pods, it's still blooming a little bit, but it has a lot of seed pods on it. Once these open up, there will be plenty of seeds, and again, I can share those with others. Right now, the roses are starting to bud up for their late season blast of bloom, and we really need the temperature to get a little bit cooler for that. I still have verbena, and again, I keep deadheading it, and it keeps blooming. As long as it has enough water, it's going to keep blooming right into fall, as long as I keep the spent bloom stalks off of it. The same is true of the coxcomb that I planted, which is an annual, and that needs some fertilizer and water occasionally. The black-eyed Susans, I tend to leave those seed heads because the goldfinches absolutely love them. and they add a lot of color to the garden flitting around in here. The phlox, again, will be deadheaded, and I have the blue phlox in that area, and then I have a white phlox further down. We have some sedums that are just budding up, so we will have some fall color too as we move out of August and into September. Those last quite a long time. This combination is one that I've liked. This is an annual salvia, and it's a, let me see what the name of it is. It's called Bodacious Rhythm and Blues, and it's a very dark blue for salvia, the annual salvia, and it gets fairly large. Put its tag back, and I like that it goes so well with this plant, which is not an annual but a perennial, and it kind of mimics some of the coloring in the leaves, the darkness of it. I've been filling my butterfly and hummingbird feeder. Butterflies do come to it occasionally, but hummingbirds as well. We've had some hummingbirds, and if we're lucky, we may have one buzz us as we're walking around the garden today. They've been both in the vegetable garden and the flower garden, as I do have flowers mixed in with the vegetables too. We're still getting some blooms from the pineapple lily. It's gone by a little bit, but it still looks nice enough to keep the pot out front. So we'll continue to do that. Heliotrope is an annual herb, and I like it over here where it can get sun. It has a lovely, lovely scent, almost like baby powder. Again, the white phlox is blooming. More of the black-eyed Susans. They're kind of a dependable in this climate. And we're still getting some color from the Monarda. And the bees are loving it, wherever there are blooms on that. The birds will like the seeds as well, so it's kind of a multi-use plant. I've been pulling up morning glories. Morning glories grew on the post last year. I planted a clematis there this year, which will hopefully bloom next year. But the morning glories seed themselves all over. If you've ever planted morning glories, you will not be rid of them for several years because you will keep picking them up, or if you let them grow and flower again, you just delay the process. So if you want to get morning glories out of an area, you need to take them completely out and just keep after it so that you get the seedlings out. Now let's move over to the vegetable garden and see what's going on there. Down in the vegetable garden, and where I also have some fruit, and the second set of raspberries is now starting to give us some fruit. The other half of the berries were about a month ago, and these are a later variety, and they could use some sun. We've had some that have just completely molded on the vine, and if you have that happen with fruit, you need to get that fruit off of there so that any new fruit doesn't become infected. And what these really need is more sun. But I can come out here and pick maybe a pint every couple days if we continue to get some sun and not quite as much rain. Some of the flowers that I've planted in this garden are starting to look like they might. This is a everlasting. You probably may recognize it as some of the blue stuff that you get in a florist's arrangement. But you can grow it too, and it will dry once it blooms. Hopefully all of these will bloom before we get a frost. My bunny troubles seem to be better, and I think that may be because I've had a hawk flying around, and I think the hawk has discouraged the rabbit, unless it may have caught a few rabbits. Hawks can do that. So I haven't seen a rabbit in the garden. I've seen some evidence that they have come in a little sneakily, but we aren't as bad as we were when we were seeing damage almost every day. So nature takes care of itself in many ways. The strawberries are doing well, and some of my second crops are up, but it's time to plant yet another crop. And I want to harvest too. So harvesting and planting are all on the list for the garden. And one of the things I want to harvest is some of this dill, which is starting to go to seed. And I want to keep some of it because I intend to make some bread and butter pickles later on. So I'm just going to cut it and put it upside down in a paper bag. You can see some of it is already bent over. It's also keeping the sun off my tomatoes. Tomatoes have not done that well for me this year. I've neglected them a bit, I must admit, as far as fertilizing and watering. That probably has a lot to do with it. If you want dill seed, you'll see there's plenty on this dill head. And they will go to seed and we will have plenty of dill in here. Next year I don't think I'll let quite as much grow. It's gotten a little much. So we'll try to get some of these out of here before they completely go to seed. And I will save some, again, ahead of the dill does very well in the pickles I intend to make. So I'll be picking that. And the other thing I want to pick, one of the other things, are seeds. And this is an annual poppy that just happened to come up here. And I can, when the seed heads turn brown and ripe, you can just shake them into a cup and you will get seeds coming out. This one isn't quite ripe. But I got a few seeds. And I've got a few of these poppies here and there throughout the garden. And I'll just keep harvesting the seeds. Some undoubtedly were already spilled on the ground right here from some of these earlier ones. So I'll probably have poppies that come up at this point. Saving seeds is pretty easy. Actually, we have a couple that are still going to bloom. But just a paper cup, and then make sure it's thoroughly dry before you put it in a little bag to save. And then those can be spread wherever you'd like poppies next year, preferably in the flower bed instead of the vegetable garden, and they will come up. The arugula is second crop is ready to pick, and this is another plant that just came up because I'd planted it before, and it's called amaranth. And it is a grain, actually, and the young leaves are edible. This one's Hopi dye, and it does have a purple dye. It's used for dyeing. And it comes up from seeds. And I usually leave a few of them in the garden here and there because I think it's a beautiful plant, and I like it in flower arrangements. We have another plant that I can take some seeds from, and that would be the cilantro that's going to seed. And cilantro that goes to seed is coriander, another spice that's often used in things like pickles and other spices. And just the seeds of that, which also will grow if you plant them next spring or even this fall. That's how a lot of this cilantro got here. But you could save those seeds and dry them as well. And you'll have a supply of that herb to last the winter. The raspberries are throwing out runners, and I try to keep those trained a little bit as we go, and definitely want to keep them weeded. I don't want an infestation of weeds within the strawberries. I do want to do a little more planting, and there are some things that you can definitely plant now that will hopefully provide a fall crop. One of those is spinach, and I'm going to put some of that in. This is the area where I took out all the peas that were finished, and I'll spread them fairly thickly. You really need to get new spinach seeds and beet seeds about every year, so you might as well use up what you have. And I ended those about here. And I'll cover those a little deeper than I did in the spring, but not much. Maybe 1/4 of an inch instead of an 1/8. And we'll see if we can get a fall crop of spinach. anytime you plant a fall crop, it's kind of iffy. It depends on the rain, it depends on the weather. It's August, middle of August. We have at least 2 more months of the growing season. So it's definitely worth a try to put in some more seeds of things that grow rather quickly. You wouldn't want to set out new tomatoes or peppers right now. They need a little more time. And most of the annual flowers as well. This is winter density romaine bib, and this has the characteristic of holding up well through a light frost, so it's definitely a good plant to put in now to give us some lettuce throughout the season. We'll cover it. We'll keep it moist unless if we don't get sufficient rain. The soil underneath is moist, which should help it germinate. Pat it down well. And again, put in another stake where we ended that. And the next thing that I can take a chance on, again, because I have the seed, would be a late crop of beans. If you'll remember, my beans were one of the casualties of the rabbit population explosion. So we're still getting a few beans now, especially since the rabbits seem to have found another spot. But since I have the seed, I might as well put in a few more. And again, those can go a little bit deeper. I also want to put some of the seed inoculant on it. This is good with peas and beans. It's a nitrogen fixing bacteria which gives them a really good start. And it also expires at the end of the year, so you want to make sure you use it if you have it, because you'll have to throw it away. And then we'll cover these, and again, cover these a little bit more. In a week to 10 days, we should start to see some growth of these. And I'm hoping that it does cool off to seasonable temperatures. We've had a lot of days over 90. And the beans may like that, but the lettuce definitely will not. So I have another stake to put in. And there's some room. I can also plant some radishes or possibly another variety of lettuce. Now we're going to move up to the other end of the garden and do some harvesting. Some of the lettuce that we planted earlier is now going to seed, and that can be just uprooted and added to your compost. You're not going to want to eat it. It's bitter with the heat, and it has gone to seed, so we're going to pull that out, and if you wish, you can use that spot to plant something else as the summer wears on. Your broccoli, if you have it, should look about like this. I purposely did not harvest it too low because now I'm getting these lovely little side shoots. I did pick it, a lot of it yesterday, because we used it in a stir fry, but it's making lovely little side shoots. You're going to cut up the broccoli anyway to serve it, so these will add. You can continue picking this, especially if the weather cools down a little bit, all the way into November. It's very heat tolerant. I also have perpetual spinach. I won't pull that up as I'm going through and getting all this old lettuce. We have annual flowers that are blooming, and feel free to cut them for bouquets, because the more you cut on zinnias particularly, the more they'll bloom. Cleome is also a nice plant, and this will probably come up here again next year, and I can plant some of that in the flower garden. I've already got a few pieces over there, but I can add to that grouping. The beans, as I've said, started to recover. This little area right in here was hard hit by the rabbits, but some of the others are doing okay, and I'm able to come out and get beans every couple days. I have a lot of different types of basil, and this too is something, if you pick off the tops, it just keeps putting out secondary stems, and it will prolong its life by picking it. Don't pick the whole thing, just take the top 4 or 5 inches off. I also have opal basil, which is the deep purple color one. Very nice with your yellow tomatoes at this time of year. Plenty of parsley, both curled and Italian, which is the flat leaf. Lots of cucumbers. A few eggplants are starting. We have a lot of kale in here too. This is the Indian bean. The rabbits got pretty much half the trellis, but we had a few plants left, and this has particularly pretty blooms. They're kind of orange and pink and very, very colorful. We've got a bee up there pollinating this one. So hopefully we will get some of these beans. This was a bean that was given to my husband by a Seneca Native American, and they wanted to have us save some seed for them. Unfortunately, I had enough this year that I thought we would be able to send them back some seed, but then the rabbits decided they liked it better, so we lost some of that. Next year I'll be sure to put a little fence around it so that they can't get in. I think we will have some seed to save this year, but probably we won't be eating the beans. They're a type of dried beans that are an ancient type vegetable and kind of interesting, but the blooms themselves are worth growing it, I think. Cucumbers are growing on this tower, and growing they are. All the rain has certainly been good for cucumbers and squash. Both cucumbers and squash contain a lot of water, and so anytime you have a lot of rain, you'll probably get a lot of those in your garden. I also have little cabbages. This is a small variety. Now once the cabbage picked, you can go, let's see if I can get one off. You can either pull the whole plant, as I just did, or you can make a little cross type square in the stem of the plant, and you may get 4 tiny little cabbages later in the season. I may try that with about every other one of these cabbages. I'm going to put the cabbage down and move over to some of the other basil I grow. This one is a lime basil. It has a lime flavor. And this one's lemon. So all kinds of basils. And again, these can be dried for use later. I love the smell of them, especially the lemony ones. That too can make a nice tea, or you can dry it for use in the winter time. We have squash. The borers have invaded the squash stems, which they usually do, but we're still getting enough. And with so many vegetables in the garden, I really don't want a million zucchini and a million yellow squash, so we'll just be happy with what we get. I don't generally preserve the summer squash in any way, so we just basically eat it fresh. And I have one of the yellow squash up here as well that can be picked. We're getting these frequently. This is the sweet Annie that I left in the garden. It's a type of an herb. It's more of a scent herb. It's used as an air freshener in some areas, kind of an old-fashioned thing. It also is nice in a wreath because it's very fragrant. So I will wait and harvest that when it starts to put on seed heads. We don't want too much of that to go to seed either, or we'll have a whole garden full. Let me put these things in my gardening basket. can see we can have plenty of vegetables to eat throughout the summer. We're getting a few tomatoes. I've been picking them as they ripen. The yellow pear tomatoes have been the earliest, along with a few cherry tomatoes. And I want to get them before they fall off. With all the rain and wind we've had, I want to get them before they fall off. You can see there are some bunches of green little cherry tomatoes in the interior of the plant. Trying to keep them off the ground as much as possible. I've also gotten a couple of the larger tomatoes from the other end of the garden. Now let's go back over to some of the potted plants. I have a number of container plants which have been watered generously by Mother Nature for the last few weeks, but you still do need to add water and fertilizer when it becomes dry. And I try to add a weak liquid fertilizer about weekly. Week to 10 days. This container holds dahlias and a canna lily, as well as a geranium in back, and a heuchera in front to give it a little color. I also have the window boxes, which again in the sun require a lot of water. These plants have put down roots. Now, remember, we have a month or two to go before summer's over. And unless you plan to replant completely your window boxes and containers, these have to hold for the summer. So all you can do to keep them going is really beneficial. So what I've been doing is taking off any spent blooms. The little petunias here are kind of self-pruning in that the flowers fall right off. But you can go back and cut. They're trying to form some little seed pods there. So if you cut those off, you're likely to get a few more blooms out of them. The verbena, the same way. I take those off after they've bloomed, and they again put out separate stalks with more blooms. So about every day I come out and just go over the container plants. I'd like to keep them glowing. This was a new type to me of plant, gypsophilia, and again I'm going to take off some of it. Sweet alyssum is what it is, and one of them is a variegated type. The other one I think came up from seed from last year, because I had some in here last year. But the spent blooms can just be pulled off and it will keep blooming. The variegated one has been very good this year. This was a new variety, and I've really been fond of it. I think I will probably continue to get some of that in future years. It's good to write down those things that have done well and those things that haven't, because that way when you go shopping next year and you see all those beautiful plants, you'll have some idea of what might work well for your garden and what might not. And that's important if you want to save a little money. I did buy a new fig plant. My fig that I've had for many years did not make it through the winter. Instead of putting it in my enclosed porch, I left it in the garage. It proved to be too cold last winter for it, and it did not survive. So henceforth, I will be putting this on in my front entry, where it's a little bit warmer and it gets a little bit of sun. Or I may leave it in the sunroom just to keep it going all year. I think it needs a little cooling, however, so I have to find out, do a little more reading on it. Any plant that you buy, you can look up on the internet and find all kinds of references as to how to care for it. What zone? We are in zone 6 now. 5 or 6 would be good plants to buy, those that are hardy to those zones. And if you see a plant like this one that's hardy to zone 9 or 10, you know you're going to have to do something in the winter. You can't just leave it outdoors and expect it to survive. So it's worth it to do a little reading and find out some of the techniques that people use to keep these things over the winter. And then you can put it back out next summer. Now let's go back into the backyard by the pond. Back here at the pond, it's a little cooler to work back here. Remember the garlic we had? We planted it last fall, and we harvested it about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. And now we have the garlic that is dried in the shed. I have a whole shed full of garlic from the row. And what I want to do is prepare it for storage. And I'm going to cut each bulb off. And I'm also going to cut off all the roots. And this I'll do with each one. And then I'll give it a good brush with a scrub brush. If the outer layer comes off, that's fine. You just want to clean it up some before you put it in a bag to store it. Then I'll put this in a mesh bag and store it in a cool place. For me, that would be my garage, right outside the back door. And we will have garlic cloves to use pretty much all winter. In fact, it will last right into spring if you have enough of it. The rest of it goes in the compost. And again, we'll cut off the stem, leave about 1 inch of the stem so it doesn't all fall apart. If you find that any cloves are falling apart, and if you've harvested it a little later than sooner, those are the ones you want to use first. They won't keep as well if they're starting to separate. If you leave it in too long, the cloves will separate because they're going to try to grow again for next year. The nice thing is you can separate the cloves and plant them this fall, about October. We'll be planting garlic. And you can separate these cloves and you'll have more garlic next year. You can just keep your garlic going forever if you do that. So these can be both edible and seed for next year's crop. Let me put them in here for now. Move it over. The fish have been really active because of the heat, and I'm going to go in and get a handful of food for them. And some things for the pond. We'll feed the fish first. And then I'll toss in a bag of these Nature's Defense enzymes. They're a natural product that help the pond break down any waste matter that will then go through the filter. I also have a product called Pond Clarity, and this is kind of a clay product. It locks up phosphate, again, to allow it to be discarded. And we just sprinkle that on the top of the pond and it soaks right in, goes through the pump. And we'll notice in just an hour or so, maybe even less, that the water will clear. What this does is it kind of groups together any particles that are in the water and sends them down to the bottom where they can be eliminated by that bacteria that we put in. So it makes the pond fairly easy to care for if you use them at the right times. If the pond is clear, I don't use them nearly as often as if it starts to get cloudy. Having the aeration and the filtration system going definitely helps my pond to stay fairly clear. Right now it's going to be a little cloudier until the particles separate out. The other thing I can do is feed the plants. And I think I can reach down to this one. I'll have to go over to the other side for the others. But this would be their last feeding of the season. And we bury these little pellets, and that'll get them going and keeping them going. Any dead leaves, and I see we have a few over there right now on the elephant ear, those will be cut off, and again, those plants can be fertilized too. It's just going to take me a little more gymnastics to get over there and do that. These plants will be coming in for the winter. We'll try to save some of them over the winter and keep them going for the duration. the pond gets shut down for the winter. And the fish will stay right there, and they'll be very happy in the pond as long as we keep a hole in the ice. One other thing that I've discovered, I read about, and it works really well, is a good way to wash windows. The side of my house has plexiglass windows. You see how tall I am, and you realize there's no way I can reach the top of the middle of those panes, even on a ladder, because of the way they are at an angle. And one of the ways to do it is with a Swiffer. And I just use the Swiffer and a solution of a cup of vinegar, a few drops of, just dishwashing liquid, hand dishwashing liquid, and use the Swiffer to clean the windows. It works quite well, and it certainly saves you a climb on a ladder and leaning way over the panes to try to get them clean. It's a good way to wash windows if you have high ones and you don't want to climb. It works extremely well. You just need to change the Swiffer pad and the water every once in a while once it gets really dirty. These windows tend to get really dirty, so it's important to spring and fall, give them a good wash. And the Swiffer makes it a really easy job. Now let's go in and see what we can do with some of the produce that we picked today. Today I'm going to try to focus on some of the local produce that's available in my garden and also in the area. I went over to Jane and Paul's and picked blueberries, and I'm going to make a blueberry sour cream pie. The things I'm going to make today are things that you can kind of make in advance. We've had some really hot weather, and I like to get up early and make things in advance, and then I have dinner all ready or well on the way before that time of the day comes. And I can go about my day and not have to worry too much about what I'm going to make for dinner and get all hot right before dinner time. So the blueberry pie, this one was given to me by a friend, the recipe, and it's fairly simple. It's a sour cream blueberry pie, and I'm going to make the filling first, which is a pint of sour cream, and I use the light variety to save a few calories. And into that I'm going to mix 3 tablespoons of brown sugar and 2 tablespoons of flour. We'll mix that in. I prefer to use a light sour cream, but not the fat-free. Somehow I don't feel that does quite as well in baking. And after all, this is dessert. We're not going to eat the whole thing at once. Now I need to get an egg out of the refrigerator and mix that in. Mix it really well. Everything's all mixed in. Then I'm going to put half of it into a graham cracker crust. That can either be a homemade or from the store. Now with 2 cups of fresh blueberries, and I'll mix in somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 cup of brown sugar. And I used a smaller amount because these berries are really sweet. We'll mix that together. put that on top of this sour cream mixture. And then I'll add the rest of it on top of them. And now it's going to go in the oven at 400 degrees for 15 to 20 minutes. And I'm going to set the timer. And we'll watch it. It may take a little longer or maybe done a little sooner. You need to watch it a little bit towards the end. And that's easy as pie. The next thing I want to make is a sauce that I'm going to use on my main dish. What I've already done is put 3 pounds of boneless spare ribs, or I guess these do have some bones, but spare ribs, meaty spare ribs, country spare ribs, into a pan, covered it with foil, and baked them for an hour at a 400-degree oven. I did that early in the morning. They're cooked. The trouble with grilling spare ribs for me is by the time the outside gets done and browned, the inside isn't quite cooked. So these are fully cooked. We'll just finish them up on the grill for dinner. But I do want to make a sauce to put on them. And for that, I'm going to leave my recipe here so I can see it. I want a 1.25 cups of ketchup, 3 tablespoons of spicy brown mustard, it's a really good rib recipe to make for company. Again, you've got them mostly finished, so they aren't going to take too long on the grill. And you have your other things ready. 3 tablespoons of water, 1/3 of a cup of cider vinegar. Put these over here. And 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. Teaspoon of onion powder, or you could put in some chopped onion if you wished. I happen to have some onion powder, so I'll put that in. And hot sauce, and I'm just going to add a little, about 1/4 teaspoon. If you wish, you can add a little more. My husband would probably like a little more. I would probably like it about like this. And I'm going to stir that around, and we're going to bring that to a simmer, and we're going to simmer that for, let's see what our recipe tells us to do here. About 10 minutes. Just simmer it so that everything blends together nicely. Now the next thing I want to do while that's simmering, and we'll watch that and keep it at a simmer once it comes to a boil. We'll turn it down. I'm going to make the recipe calls it a corn chowder salad, which is kind of interesting. And I thought, oh, that sounds like fun. So it's a variation. Normally you might have beans and potato salad with your ribs, but this is something a little different. And you've probably had corn on the cob. I got my corn while I was up at the farm, and thought this would be a great way to use it. And earlier I did cook the 6 pieces of bacon, and I did save the fat because we're going to put 1 tablespoon of bacon fat back in the pan. And I've cut the, oops, this is starting to boil, and it always seems to get out of the pan a little bit. I'll put in about 3.5 cups of corn, and we're going to stir that around until it browns a bit. And this is just corn that's been cut off the cob, husked and cut off. Our corn has cooked a bit in that bacon fat, just a little, and we're ready to take it off the heat. And I'm going to let it cool in this pan a little bit before I add other ingredients. So while we're waiting for it to cool, I'm going to make the dressing for the salad. And for that, I'm going to use half a cup of sour cream, and a tablespoon of cider vinegar, a teaspoon of fresh minced thyme that came out of the garden. Remember, if you use dried herbs in place of fresh ones, use about 1/3 as much. And let's see, I want to make sure and we're going to add some paprika. And this is a smoked paprika, which is a little bit different. It's more readily available now than it once was. It adds a little smoky flavor. Half a teaspoon of that. And then we need some salt and pepper. And I'm just going to grind in some pepper. Quite a bit, in fact. And a bit of salt. We'll have some salt in there from the bacon, so I don't want to overdo the salt. Maybe a half teaspoon to start. You can always add salt, but it's hard to take it out. So we want to add that. And we'll mix that. The recipe that I had actually divided 2 scallions, which had been chopped, into the whites and the green part. I did not see any sense in doing that, so I'm just going to add the 2 chopped scallions to the salad. They added the green part, or the white part, to the dressing and the green part to the dish, but there's no sense in doing that. You can always make shortcuts if you find them. We also want to add 3 cups of cooked diced potatoes. And again, I did those earlier this morning, and they've been in the refrigerator, drained well. And the 6 slices of bacon, which have been crumbled. Also, 1/3 cup chopped flat leaf parsley. Again, something from the garden. I'll mix these together with a little bit, just mix them. And then add the dressing. A little different than your normal potato salad. It has the corn, the bacon, and a flavorful dressing. And we'll mix that around well. All the ingredients for corn chowder, pretty much. Only it isn't soup, it's salad. I will refrigerate this until serving time, and then bring it out of the refrigerator once the ribs are ready. Now, how's our sauce coming? I think it's been about 10 minutes. Part of this I'm going to put into a bowl. And this will be served alongside the ribs. It's good to remember never to If you've marinated your meat or made a sauce that you brushed on the meat while you're cooking it, never use that same sauce on your meat when it's finished. If raw meat has marinated in it, any bacteria in the raw meat will stay in the marinade. So always be sure that you've either cooked that marinade thoroughly or poured some off into another dish to serve with the meat. And just to be safe, I'll do that even now. We're going to paint those ribs with the sauce, and we'll continue doing that as we grill them. It gets a little messy, but not too bad. And then while they're being grilled, we can continue to baste them with the sauce. You can add a little of the sauce and put it back in the refrigerator until it's time to go out and barbecue the ribs. And just finish them off. Remember, they're fully cooked already. And you have some nice sauce to serve with them. We'll garnish up the salad with a little extra parsley. This time I'll use the curled parsley. It's not as flavorful, but it is a little more attractive, I think. Or you could use a sprig of thyme as well, since both are in the dish. We wanted to cook the pie until the filling was set, and it is. So I'm going to take it out, and I'll bring it over to the counter and let it cool a little. Then we'll put it in the refrigerator and chill it until we eat it for supper, for dessert. Before we close completely, I do want to mention the flowers that I've used. These are from the garden: phlox, the cleome, the amaranth, which I love in flower arrangements. Very soon it will probably tint the water in the vase a little pink. And dahlias, which are in full force right now. If you've planted dahlias, you should be getting lots of blooms, and a zinnia or two. And it makes a nice flower arrangement to bring in. They don't always last a long time, especially when it's hot, but it's very nice to have some fresh flowers you can bring in the house. So I always plan my garden around planting at least a few things that give me a fresh bouquet almost every week. We have now our supper all ready, or will be ready as soon as we do a little finishing. The pie needs to be chilled until it's served, and the salad could do with some chilling as well. The spare ribs will go on the grill to be finished right before we eat them. And supper's all done, and the day is still young. So I'm Liz Davey, and you've been watching A Walk in the Garden on NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable Television. We'll see you next time when we pick some more things from the garden and see what we can do to preserve them.